but also I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Most of us are here. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our first ever job preparedness workshop. My name is Katie Lowe, and I am one of the facilitators of the mentorship program. And thanks again for coming. We are excited to help you all enhance your interviewing skills and your resume curation for this upcoming job application season. Before I start, I wanted to highlight some important folks in the room. So I want to introduce or let Allison Ernie, our program coordinator, introduce yourself or say hi.
Hey everyone, I'm Allison. Most of you probably know me already, and I'll just be helping out with Zoom logistics today, so you can feel free to direct message me if you have any questions.
And then Rachel, do you want to say hi to the folks?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Hedges. I work for Berkeley Forests, which is UC Berkeley's Center for Forestry Research and Outreach. I'm excited to be talking to you all today.
Great, Rachel. And Val?
Hello, Valerie Elder, Forestry and Natural Resources Professor at College of the Redwoods, and I'll be covering some interviewing best practices today.
Awesome, thank you. And again, we are really fortunate for the mentorship program to have the fiscal support of CAL FIRE, Green Diamond Resource Company, the California Licensed Foresters Association, California Women in Timber, and Cal Alumni Foresters, as well as the programmatic support from employees of the Placer Resource Conservation District and UC Cooperative Extension. So before we start with the resume portion, I just want to remind you all that to please check your time slot on the sign-up sheet. Allison, if you could please paste that in the chat to make sure you know when your resume review session or your mock interview session is going to be today. After the presentations on interview and resume skills, we're going to move on to that second half where you can have your one-on-one meetings with professionals. Please be sure to rejoin the Zoom meeting at least a few minutes prior to your time slot so we can make sure you're properly moved into your correct breakout room session at your scheduled time. And then finally, a few Zoom rules for today. If you're able and comfortable doing so, please rename yourself with your name and your school and your pronouns. During the presentation, please keep yourselves muted. And if you have questions for any of our presenters, either during or after their presentations, you can ask them in the chat function, or you can raise your hand in the question and answer session afterwards. And with that, I will leave it to Val to talk, or sorry, Rachel to talk about resume review.
Sorry, just a minute. I am getting my presentation pulled up. So, okay. Katie, are you guys seeing the presentation view now? Okay, great. One last thing. Okay. Can you guys still see the?
Yes, it's the presentation view for us. Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. It's changed a little bit. It really was tripping me up. So thank you guys again for having me. My name is Rachel Hedges. I'm really excited to be here today talking to you all about the development of your resumes, because I know for our students at Berkeley, it is not something that they really get in any kind of formal way unless they take one very specific class. So hopefully some of what you hear today will be helpful to you. So why am I the person here giving this talk to you? You know, I've been working in natural resources now for over a decade, and I've worked at a really wide variety of places, ranging from federal all the way down to local, resource agencies. I've worked in the academic world. And during that time, I've participated in a wide variety of kind of hiring activities. So resume screenings, I've sat on interview committees. Of course, I myself have been interviewed many times. And I have hired many people and screened resumes specifically for jobs that I was hiring for and interviewing for. So I have some tangible experience, but I also, I don't just rely on my own personal experience. I think more important than my own personal experience is the outreach and the research that I do. So I look at publications that talk about the most current best practices in terms of resume writing. I do a survey of professionals that I know working in natural resources to ask them questions about what they like to see on resumes, what looks good, what doesn't. And then I try to condense all of that to share with you in presentations like this. So before we launch into the meat of the presentation, a few words on, why you're all here. So obviously you think it's important to know how to write a resume, but I want us to say a couple words on that. Most reviewers, especially for more entry-level jobs, which are the types of jobs you all will be applying for right out of college, are seeing anywhere from dozens to over 100 resumes with one job call. And with that amount of review, a lot of times a reviewer's first pass is not actually looking for the good resumes to keep. It's looking for the bad resumes that they want to get rid of, that they're looking to get out of their stack. And then after that, they go back and they go through the remaining resumes and, kind of order those. But even after they've weeded through that first, with 100 resumes, even after you get the bad ones out, you can still have between 10 and 15 resumes that you're trying to read through. So another thing that I hope to do with this presentation is to give you some tools that will really help you put together a clear, concise resume that doesn't require a reviewer to sift through a lot of useless information. So the presentation today really deals with building blocks for putting together a great resume that's going to keep your resume in the pile, and then tips for keeping the information contained within your resume relevant and purposeful, so that when reviewers are reading it, it really feels like a thoughtful and intentional resume. I do want to give one disclaimer before I start. I always give this. So as I mentioned, I compile like widely accepted best practices, right? And I take feedback from multiple sources and I try to put it into some general pointers for creating resumes. The people that review resumes are individuals, and individuals often have their own ideas of what is best. So you might hear from someone at some point in your interviewing journey or your resume writing journey that they like something, they give you advice that directly conflicts with what you hear today. And that's okay, right? All I have to say about that is if that's the person you're applying for a job with, then take their advice and make your resume the way that they have suggested it. Otherwise, use the best practices here today. So, this was originally titled, what goes into a resume? How do we build a resume? That's what people always ask. What goes into a resume? But I think the real question that we're trying to ask is, what is the purpose of a resume, right? And so with that, I will open up the chat. Just if you want to throw in the chat, like, what do you think is the purpose of a resume? Because I really think that helps us determine what we're going to put in there. Don't be shy. It's okay. Awesome. Okay, I see some things starting to come in the chat. Relevant experience. Yeah, a curated look of who you are as an employee. I really like that phrasing. Experiences and skills to make you stand out. That's right. That's exactly right on. Your resume is oh, Lewis, it's like you know me. Your resume is a snapshot of you as an employee. I like to call it the highlight reel, right? It's like the best pieces of your career all wrapped up on one piece of paper, one page. But it does a few other things too, right? Your resume also conveys to an employer whether or not you understand things like professionalism, whether you have read and understood the requirements of the job. Are you someone who pays attention to details? All of those kinds of things. But at the core of your resume, what a reviewer really wants to understand from what you're putting on that piece of paper is what makes you uniquely qualified to work in the position that you're applying for. And those are really important pieces. Those two pieces that I've underlined are important pieces because you want to talk in specifics about yourself. That's what makes you uniquely qualified. And you want to be specific about the position you're applying for. So, people never like this, but it does often mean that you are making a new resume for every job you're applying for. You're not reinventing the wheel every time. You have a master resume that you use, but you tailor it to each different job posting. So today I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking both about structure and content of your resume, and then we'll wrap up at the end with just a few best practices that can be generally applied to every resume. So let's jump right into creating your resume because that is what you are all here for. I like to do this by talking about structure first and then getting into some of the details of content. I also want to mention briefly that there are two really nice resume building guides. Those will come to you all from Allison, I believe. She'll share my presentation, and with that, she'll also share these two different resume and cover letter development guides. So you will see those as well. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is structure. How are you going to structure your resume? What are the bones? What is the outline that eventually you will fill in? There are a variety of different structures you can use, and you'll see a lot of different ideas for those in the materials that Allison sends. But generally, you want the structure of your resume to best highlight whatever your skills, experience, and education are, the combination of skills, experience, and education that you have. So, an example I like to give is if you're a student, probably the most work that you've done in the field comes from your education. That might be the thing that you want to put at the top of your resume. Maybe you haven't had a lot of experience actually working in forestry jobs, so that's something that goes farther down. Again, it's going to depend on you and your skills and experience. So, use those tools that you'll get, but really customize it to highlight your unique combination of skills and experiences. All that said, for the students that I see who have just graduated or are still in school and applying to jobs, the structure that most commonly works well for you all is education, a skills section, an experience section, and then some kind of section that highlights your activities, awards, and leadership experiences and experience. And again, only you're going to know what structure best highlights your skills and strengths, but this tends to work best for most of the students that I work with. So once you've decided on a structure, you'll kind of use that as the guide for building the rest of your resume. Essentially, you'll turn it into the outline. And I always recommend starting with an outline and then going in to fill in the details, because it's a lot easy to think kind of from the top down than it is to start by trying to remember the details of one particular job or one particular research experience that you have. It helps you develop a clearer story starting with an outline than getting bogged down with the details right away, if that makes sense. So you start with your outline, you get your education down, you note that it's whatever university you went to, maybe your experience come next, you make a bulleted list of the jobs that you've had, and then, you put in your awards section and do a quick bulleted list of awards. And then you can go back through and, using the outline, fill in the details of what you were actually doing in that job. And one thing I like to tell people is sometimes when they go back and fill the information in, they see that actually one section is a lot stronger than another section, and you might want to change the structure a little bit, and that's okay, right? Like, that's a good thing if you realize that, and then you tailor your resume to better fit your skills. So once you have the structure and you've created the outline, then you can really start to develop the content that is going to go into each of your different sections. And this is where I find that the tools are really, really helpful, right? Because the tools, these two different resume writing guides, they have a lot of really great tools for like different words you can use to describe what you've done, and ways that you can structure sentences so that they are more exciting and not repetitive. And so that's really, you'll use those to go in and really develop the detailed content. So getting more into the details of the resume, these are kind of the different sections that I've referenced already. So we're going to dive into the details of what you would be putting in each of these sections. Before I get into this, normally when I'm teaching this in a class, this is the time when someone raises their hand and says, what about a personal statement? Where would I put that? I will tell you that I generally do not recommend to my students that they put personal statements on their resume. And the reason for that is that I think they are often generic. Students put them on there, but they don't actually tell the reviewer anything about you that the reviewer is not going to get from what's in your resume or what's in your cover letter. So I'm not against personal statements, but I just want to say, if you are going to take that real estate up on the page, make sure that you're actually saying something meaningful to the person that is reviewing, your resume. So a little bit about the education section. You guys can read this, you're going to get these, so I'm not going to go through every bullet point. What I want to talk quickly about is relevant coursework. That's something that I encourage my students to include in their resumes, especially if they don't have a lot of work experience. I think, you want to keep it short and descriptive. You don't have to like write a summary of what the class was about, but it's really helpful for a potential employer to know if you've taken an operations class, or you've taken a roads class, or you've taken a silviculture class, or for our students at Berkeley, like if you've gone to forestry camp and you have some field-based coursework under your belt. It just gives them a sense that you may be able to do things that it wouldn't be clear you could do from just looking at your experience. The next section that I usually encourage my students to include is a skills section. And again, I think this is a really nice section to have when you don't have a ton of like professional experience, right? Because you can gain skills in a variety of different ways, including through coursework and field work, like field work as part of your education. So in skills, this is really where you're putting hard skills. These are maybe like 1 or 2 words bulleted out, a really short, concise list. And this is where you would put things like the tools and technology you can use, any kind of programs and models you've run. Some people like to put, like, if they speak multiple languages in here. I say, and so really the lens here when you're putting your skills together is what is relevant to the job. So go back, read the job description. Oftentimes there's a section that's like duties of the job, and it will tell you exactly what kind of skills they're looking for. So if you have like above and beyond those skills that might be useful, you can put those in too. But that's really going to be the guide for what types of skills you want to include in this section. Some people like to put like beginner or advanced or things like that. I often encourage my students not to be dishonest, but also not to sell themselves short at like the first glance of their resume. So of course, if you have an advanced, use of programs like R, for example, or advanced GIS user, then I would use an adjective to describe your level. Otherwise, you can just, note that it's a skill you have, that you've done. I don't know that you necessarily need to like rate yourself. Allison, I have till 1:05, right? That's what I have on my.
Yes.
Okay.
And there is a question in the chat. Is this the section where you would put certificates and licenses?
So you can absolutely put it here. I sometimes stick those in down at the bottom. I guess I did not write certificates, but I sometimes use like awards and certificates together, or like leadership and certifications. I think they fit in either place. So you can either put it in skills, or if you have a lot of different certifications, sometimes it makes sense to give them their own section down closer to the bottom. So then we'll move on and talk about experience. This is really oftentimes, and again, you might not have a ton of professional experience right now, and that's okay because you're a student. But as you go along, this is really going to be the section that contains the meat of your resume, right? This is really where you're going to communicate what you've done in past jobs, why it's pertinent or relevant to the job you're applying for now. And this is really where you can also describe those like soft skills. In other words, works well in a team, has experience with teamwork, is a good communicator, those kinds of things. I do like to note here that, I see a lot of people title this section professional experience. And I encourage my students to just leave professional out, because a lot of them have really relevant, good experience that perhaps they have not been paid for, like volunteer experience, research experience that they are doing for like a thesis project. A lot of that can go into this experience section. because a lot of it is very relevant to the jobs that you'll be applying for. So that's just a few words on why I choose intentionally to call it experience versus like professional experience. Some people call it relevant experience. I think that's kind of a waste of a word, because why would you put experience on your resume that was not relevant to the job? But, you know, to each their own. And then there's a little bit more information in here about how you might structure that experience that you put in. The next slide, this is from one of those tools that I was talking about, one of those resume building guides. But I find that this, you know, action verb plus project plus result is a very nice way to phrase a lot of the work that you've done, both professionally and, you know, maybe for volunteer work or for like honors thesis type work. You don't have to quite, you know, you don't have to be wordy, but I think especially the inclusion of a result of whatever you're saying that you've done is really nice to let employers know, like, not only did you work on this project or this thing, but you were successful at it as well. So that's also in the materials that you'll get, but I like to call it out here because I do just find it really, really helpful. I had one other thing to tell you guys about experience. I'm going to go back quickly. Oh, yes. One other thing that I find with students is that they have held many jobs and they have a lot of professional experience, but they are often hesitant to put it in unless it is like specifically forestry related. And to that, I would say, particularly with these soft skills, a lot of professional skills are really transferable. So like time management, working in a team, communicating, those are all things that you will learn on like many different kinds of jobs. That are really relevant to like any other job you're applying for. So I would encourage you to put jobs in your experience section, even if they're not forestry specific jobs. This is just my little funny joke about to remind everyone, of course, I mean, I don't think that you would, but like, don't lie on your resume, because eventually it will catch up to you either in your interview or once you get hired. And that's not a great look for you in an interview. And it's an even worse way to start a job. So, you know, I mean, present your best self, but like, you don't need to make stuff up. There are a lot of forestry jobs out there right now. You don't have to lie to get hired. And a lot of employers expect to do some on-the-job training with students that are just coming out of college. So I think, you know, keep that in mind too. So moving on to the next section that we typically see on resumes, and that is this kind of, here I have it listed as activities, but you might call it activities and leadership. You might call it leadership and awards. You might call it any combination of those things. Again, it depends on what you're putting in here that you want to highlight, right? So if you have a lot of activities, but you don't sit on like the leadership, like the executive committee of any of those activities, obviously you wouldn't call it activities and leadership. Oh. A very scary guard dog. So I think the big message I want to give about activities is that they really, really need to be relevant to the position that you're applying for, or find a way to make them relevant. So if you had to organize an event for like a club that you were in, a lot of the work that you did in organizing that might be relevant to the job. Again, that's like time management, budgeting, communication and outreach, those kinds of things, right? I think where I see students go wrong is that they'll put these huge long lists of activities together, and the ones that are really relevant almost get lost in that like super long list. So just use an editing eye when you're doing that. And the same goes for awards and leadership positions that you've held. Although I think if you've held a leadership position in any organization, it's worth putting it on your resume because it shows that you have some leadership experience, which is often applicable regardless of what the job is or who it's with. This is also usually when I get the question about hobbies. And I usually tell students to save space on your resume for something that's more relevant to the reviewer. So if you have relevant hobbies, for example, if you are going to work in the woods and one of your hobbies is like backcountry hiking, that's a super relevant hobby that you might put on there, but I would just stick it in under activities. If you are going to tell them that you like love crocheting and knitting, my view and like from what I have gathered from my research is that that space would have been better used to tell them something else about yourself that is more relevant to the job. So, again, I'm not anti-hobbies, just like I'm not anti-personal statement. My issue with those types of things come in when it basically ends up being wasted space that you could have used to tell them something more interesting. All right. Oh, shoot. Okay. And then references. So this will depend on the employer. Some employers want you to include references on your resume. And if they ask for that specifically, then of course do it. Otherwise, leave them off. There will come a different time for references. A few very short words on best practices. Your resume should be professional, right? A professional font, color scheme, and design. That doesn't mean it has to be boring, but it means that it is not like an arts and crafts project. Feel free to use some different colors in there and maybe some different design elements, but like particularly I see these resumes that come from Canva and they are just like unhinged with like your photo and like a bunch of different shapes and this and that. And it's like, we're not writing a graphic novel, we're writing our resumes. So, try to keep it professional, but do feel free to mix some things in there that might set it apart from the staff. Obviously, proofread, and actually have someone else proofread it. That's the best way to ensure that everything is correct and that it's easy for someone else to read. Finally, best practices say that at this point in your career, your resume would be a single page. Some people like more than that, but best practices are single page. If you are applying through USA Jobs, that is an exception. You should literally put everything you have ever done and make like a 7-page resume. That's how that platform is set up to work, but for the most part, a 1-page resume. We already talked about tailoring your resume, including relevant information, and finally, sending as a PDF. And that's just going to help you avoid any kind of formatting issues when someone opens it up and it doesn't show up right in there. In whatever, computer software that they have. Lastly, send it off, do one last check of everything, draft the email that's going to accompany your resume, keep it short and concise, make sure to note any requirements. So like a lot of times job postings will say, please list your last name and the job title you're applying for in your email. So make sure that you see that and that you have all of that information in there. Don't forget to include your attachments. That is like one thing that I know has probably happened to all of us, but really try to remember that. And then send it off and breathe a sigh of relief. So that's it for me today. There's my contact information. I have this in here just as a reminder to you all that Job searching can be hard and frustrating, and anyone who's done it a lot knows that there's a lot of rejection involved in it. You will find something that is right for you. It might just take time. So don't give up hope. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rachel. We're gonna transition to Val now. Rachel, there's a question from William in the chat. If you could answer that in the chat, that'd be great.
I will do that.
Thanks. All right, take it away, Val.
Okay, great. And just to transition with that, my grad school advisor would always tell me that every interview is a success. So regardless if you get a position after you submit your resume or after you interview or not, just getting past this stage of that resume review, everything Rachel just covered, and getting an interview is a huge success. So try to celebrate those small successes along the way. And I love presenting in this interviewing best practices section of the forestry mentorship program. It's something I'm just really excited about. I teach forestry natural resources at College of the Redwoods. And so one of my courses is a career seminar class where we cover interviewing and resumes. But before my time at College of the Redwoods, I served as a search advocate through Oregon State University. And so I've had some special training on helping create search processes as an advisor, to work with search committees and to make job application processes more equitable and address diversity in those processes. So I try to bring that lens to this presentation. And again, this is an overview for the students participating. Be sure to ask your mentor for their tips and suggestions for interviewing best practices, because as Rachel mentioned, there's a lot of different perspectives, but I try to cover some key things for you to consider as part of this. So today I'm going to cover a little bit about preparation, the interview, following up, and then I'll summarize what we're talking about. This is kind of a research protocol or a recipe for success that we'll cover, including how to research a position, what to wear, how to practice, some types of interviewing questions, this concept of presence and what you bring to the interview. And so let's go ahead and get started. So preparation. But maybe you've submitted your resume, you've polished everything up based on Rachel's tips and techniques, and you've got an interview scheduled. So I suggest that you do a little bit of research to prepare for your interview. This could mean visiting the company website and maybe checking their Facebook or Instagram pages just to learn a little bit about that company or organization that you're working for, so you know some of the really key things. So, what type of silviculture do they practice, for example? A lot of times you can get a lot of information ahead of time just by looking at those different sources. I also suggest that you familiarize yourself with the mission statement, and you're probably not going to necessarily have to repeat that verbatim, but there may be questions about how your interests align with the organizational mission. So being able to have some reference to what the mission of that organization is, whether it be CAL FIRE or a local company. I also suggest that you do a little research on the local ecology of an area. So if you're coming to the North Coast, be familiar with with what type of species you might find up here. So be knowledgeable that it's going to be coastal redwood, not giant sequoia, for example, and vice versa. So be familiar with the local ecology just a little bit, know what kind of species are going to be there, and do some time maybe looking into what challenges and opportunities might be in that area. And your mentors as part of this program can be really good resources for helping you understand that information. Also think about if you want to live there. I've heard the story, about somebody that was applying for a job, and them and their parents drove for a week all the way from the East Coast out here to actually Mad River, and got out, used the bathroom, turned around and left. So maybe just research really quickly some of the places that you are interviewing for, and just think about living there seasonal and full-time. Take a peek at housing, see what options and things might be there, just so you're, knowledgeable of questions that you might ask about what it's like to live there. You may call ahead, and if you have some, really burning questions or questions about sort of the process, I think that shows initiative. You're not going to get the interview questions ahead of time or anything like that, but you can sort of put some communication ahead of time in some circumstances. And prepare questions. So I think having questions in an interview really shows that you're serious about a job, and you can come up with some of those questions from all this kind of previous research information. And then I also really strongly suggest that this is a small community of practice. A lot of foresters and natural resource professionals know each other or work together. And so as soon as possible, if you've accepted another position and you're not going to be interviewing, it is really ethical and polite and good practice to let the organization or company know that you're not going to be able to accept the interview for a position, or you have to cancel. And so just not showing can kind of have a negative impact, and it's really best to try to communicate ahead of time. Okay, so this next part of preparing should be easy, right? Know your skills and abilities. So spend some time reflecting about your past experiences and identify those skills and abilities that you've used in the past. So this might be as simple as just creating a list. Creating your resume, of course, is a really good opportunity to help with this, but create a list of your accomplishments. Think about examples of where you've led a volunteer opportunity, did really well in a class, those different jobs that you have, especially those that were really meaningful to you, and thinking about those roles as a volunteer, an intern, working on group projects, because your experiences can really translate into your abilities, skills, and interests that an employer is looking for. And so being able to talk about those experiences in a straightforward way is really important. And there's kind of a balance between being too humble and not selling yourself or selling yourself short, or overselling some of those skills and abilities. So we don't want to be like boastful or too humble, but just get comfortable talking about these skills and abilities depending on how you were raised and your values and your ranges of experience. This may be harder for some of you than others, so it's a good thing to practice. And try to have detail about these experiences. So what abilities do these special kind of accomplishments demonstrate, rather than it just, this is what I did. Okay, but describe for us, show us how that is. What specific skills have you used to accomplish these things? And how can you use these skills in the job that you're being interviewed for? Trying to connect the dots between what you've done and what you want to do in this job for that interviewer makes you a stronger candidate. And so I suggest you come up with like 7 or 10 experiences that seem like they're the most important to you. Describe those in detail, write them out, write bulleted lists, and kind of practice those, asking yourself those questions. And that way you're familiar with your experiences and comfortable talking about them. Okay, and then plan your route. You should, generally in this field, common practice is being 5 minutes early is on time. So plan to be on time and try to reduce stressors and distractions for you on the day of. There's nothing worse than like sweating and, you want to be driving safely and get somewhere early with plenty of time to use the restroom before you go in, get a drink of water, collect your thoughts, and try to plan the route. Sometimes these organizations or businesses might be in rural areas without great cell phone service. And so, ask for questions if you have, if you need to, if you're not sure where the location is, because sometimes the company website might have like a mailing address or something rather than like the physical site. So be sure you know where you're going and try to plan on it and be early. Don't be like too early. So, if you're an hour early or something, that's not necessarily respectful for the interview committee's time. And it really depends on the scale of the type of interview. If this is a really small office or organization, maybe they're doing a lot of other things that day, or maybe there's a whole bunch of people interviewing. So be on time and know where you're going. So what to wear? My personal story with this one is I grew up in, a logging family here in Northern California. And for one of my first field positions, I sort of asked my dad, which was not a good person to ask, but, asked my dad what I should wear. And he's like, okay, well, you want to wear like your work clothes, but like the nicer ones so that they know you work hard, but not really dirty ones. Okay. And so, that's okay advice, but you should bring a pair of work boots with you. A lot of times, maybe not a lot of times, but sometimes your interviewee, the person that's interviewing you might want to say, hey, do you have time to do a little ride along? And, the worst thing would be if you have just like shiny leather shoes and wouldn't be able to kind of go out in the field. And so I think that professional forestry interviews at this stage, generally, being able to sort of transition from interview to field is pretty common. There's exceptions to that where you might be fancier than other times. But like 9 times out of 10, I think this is probably what the person interviewing you might look like. And then this is generally kind of acceptable interviewer wear, depending on the organization again. But you generally, as an interviewee, you want to be just dressed a little nicer to present yourself. So there's all kinds of different like diagrams out there. And at the SAF convention last week or a couple weeks ago, we were observing what forestry fashion is. But here's this kind of like smart casual, which is kind of one of the best descriptors that I've seen. And I'm open to feedback, and you should ask your mentors. But kind of somewhat of a neutral button-down shirt for both positions. Generally, a jacket or a tie isn't needed. Some kind of a casual leather shoe and like neutral colored type pants. So this is kind of this like smart casual look, something that you could easily transition to the field if you needed to, but maybe you're dressed a little bit nicer than like the typical flannel, which I realize is what I'm wearing today, but the flannel and blue jeans. And this is really a personal preference. And kind of how you interpret this, but generally kind of trying to be clean and confident in what you're wearing. My other tip for this is presence. And so to me, presence is kind of like centering yourself and knowing, I'm here for this interview. Be excited about it. You'll probably be nervous, but my method and my suggestion for how to kind of like curb some of your nervousness is try to just really focus on how you are presenting yourself to this room. So as much as possible, kind of focus on the task at hand and being present and being there, and being able to show your genuine self. And so you can kind of think about what you stand for. Think about how you're connecting with others, how you communicate. And this includes nonverbal communication. Those are really important skills too. So kind of the way you sit, stand, and walk, does sort of communicate a lot about who you are. So just sort of be aware of your self-image and something like a handshake. So a really like limp handshake sometimes can demonstrate like a lack of confidence or something, right? But also just like squeezing the life out of somebody also says something. So kind of just try to give a firm handshake, try to look people in the eye, and try to sit up straight and think about how you're presenting yourself in the room rather than what they're like staring at you and looking at. So try to sort of project out that confidence. It's a hard thing to do, but just like try to like dig deep inside to do that. Okay, so preparing, in summary, think about your past experiences, know your skills and abilities, consider your personality and your appearance and be your genuine self. have knowledge of the employer and the job field, and kind of like think about, what are your future plans, and try to sort of have 7 to 10 experiences ready to go to help answer interview questions. So you're prepared, you're at the interview, you're 5 minutes early. So what is an interview, right? So an interview is kind of it's a conversation, and it's directed towards a definite purpose. So a job interview should have kind of 4 basic tasks. It should establish a good rapport and friendly atmosphere for both parties involved. It should be a method to obtain relevant information about you as an interviewee working for this organization or company or group. It should be about evaluating the information relative to that objective of getting that job, and to provide information. And in this section, I'm going to cover concept of assertive questions, behavioral interviews, and illegal questions. So communication skills, I talked a little bit about digging deep and like presenting your best self. And so trying to like build up your confidence ahead of an interview can be really helpful. And having confidence at that interview is an opportunity for you to better express your ideas and listen, and share your marketable skills with that employer. So try your best to build up that confidence. Listen closely. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. Try to avoid answering questions with just like a yes or no answer. Be able to provide specific examples. That's what you did in that preparation stage, right? So that you're able to elaborate, and you can kind of look for verbal or nonverbal cues on what gives you an idea of how the interview is responding to you. But be careful reading into that, because sometimes an interviewer will like, the best advocate behind that table for you may just be this like really stern like person that's not giving you any feedback. People have different styles as interviewers, and usually don't have a whole lot of like training on that. So try not to read too much into things, but like they may, if somebody really like starts tapping their hands or something like that, it might be time to sort of finish up that answer and move on to a new one. And then just sort of being like assertive in your questions and in your answers. So trying to honestly describe things, but like, for example, if you're outlining your best qualities, try to communicate numbers and information like I paid for 75% of my own college experiences or something, rather than sort of just saying I'm a hard worker and I want to get ahead. And so trying to be assertive in your responses by including numbers and really describing what you've been doing can be really helpful. And doing a mock interview, like most of you are participating in today, is a good way to kind of get practice in being assertive with your responses. And you can be careful to, like, you don't have to volunteer your shortcomings, and just try to be positive when you're describing circumstances, especially a challenging question like, describe a conflict, etc. It's kind of a challenging situation for someone interviewing someone if your responses are all about like blaming other people. So you don't necessarily have to like give up all the dirty laundry, but you should kind of be honest in how you're responding to those questions and show that you are self-reflective and you're learning from experiences. And I kind of already described this, but being assertive and answering your questions, sort of try to positively state your qualifications without denying any of your possible shortcomings and being specific. So my example for this is like, the question could be, is there, in this job, there are a lot of deadlines. What makes you think you can write under pressure? So hopefully if you're a student, you're thinking about what your response might be. A suggestion, you're a student, right? So as a student, I'm used to writing under a deadline. We have multiple assignments and lots of varying due dates. I'm confident I can handle pressures that come with this position. So there's a type of interviewing called behavioral interviewing. And preparing these types of interview questions for yourself can give you some responses, not like a totally rehearsed response, but understanding some of your experiences and ways to apply them to this future job. So you should be able to talk about your significant accomplishments. Think about school projects you've done, volunteer activities, situations where you overcame some barrier, and prepare like 60 or 90-second stories. And you can sort of use this format. So it's not scripted, but so you're thinking about these areas. So like be able to describe the situation. You know, what was this situation? Provide some context. Don't talk for hours about it, but, you know, enough to know why it was important. Describe what the task was. And, you know, how would you, you know, settle this situation or challenge, for example. Talk about what actions you took and why. And you can use dynamic action verbs to describe that. And then describe what happened because of your actions. Did your actions improve the situation? And really important, what did you learn? So many employers want to know about your ability to learn in these entry-level positions. So be able to describe experiences quickly, select the most appropriate one, and kind of try to describe it effectively. So these behavioral interview questions give you a chance to showcase your skills and give you an opportunity to really present your accomplishments. You're making these things on your resume that gave them the idea like, hey, I want to talk to this person and find out a little more about them. You're bringing that to life. And so if you can be specific and kind of action oriented, describing the task, action, results, that can be really helpful. And these are behavioral types of interview questions. So an example of how you might do this is describe a time you worked through a challenging situation or had a conflict with a team member. So that can be a really common interview question. And here's my template for you. So if you're preparing for your interviews this afternoon, you could come up with an example quickly, if you haven't already, for that question and describe the situation, describe the tasks, the action, the result, and what you learned from that. So I'll give you all a second just to think about that and prepare for your interviews later. Describe a time you worked through a challenging situation or had a conflict with a team member. Situation, task, action, result, what you learned. I have an example for you rather than having you share out now since you have the opportunity later. But here's an example you might have had in a class. In my harvesting class, I was working in a team and we suspected our GPS units had the wrong points for collecting data. My teammate wanted to cross the school forest property boundary to a neighbor's land. Then the task, okay, and you don't have to say task, this is for you to think about these things, but I had to figure out the best way to get the work done, but also negotiate our team's decision for a safe and meaningful outcome. Students knew they weren't supposed to cross the property boundary, right? The action, talked with my teammates about the instruction, those directions not to trespass. We took a moment to evaluate the situation, a little safety, and they double checked their points and the teammate realized they had made a mistake. The result, we double checked our points, corrected our mistake by taking a moment to assess the safety in the situation to work efficiently and safely. And you learned about completing reconnaissance work before you head out in the field is really helpful and can help prevent such challenges. You also learn to work through conflict with communication. So that's an opportunity for you to use this behavior model. You're not going to sit there and like read something, right? But going through this practice of analyzing the situation, task, action, results, and how you learned can be really helpful. So illegal questions. This can be sort of a challenging thing as an interviewee, and it really depends on the type of organization that you're working for. Some organizations are, going to be really strict. Sometimes not everyone on the interview panel might know that they aren't supposed to sort of ask you those kinds of questions. So if you have the right not to answer a question that you feel like is not discriminatory or that is discriminatory, right? And then if you do choose to answer like a illegal question you're not comfortable with, something that's not job related or is information that you feel like could be held against you, like your age, your sex, your race, some of these different things that they're not, disability status, some of these things that they're maybe not supposed to ask you. You could try to answer in a way that's neutral, that's maybe not as not defensive, or kind of like try to keep your responses short for those questions. And you can sort of also try to deflect a question by diverting it to a similar job topic that's related, or kind of inquire how that might relate to a job. And so if you're in a situation like this, an interview is an opportunity for you to evaluate an employer and decide if this is somewhere you want to work and people, you want to work with. And so, use that as like a learning experience opportunity for you in considering that experience. And then state interviews. Jason had some really good advice kind of about state interviews, and maybe I'll let him share that in his introduction. But the bottom line with it is, not every interview you have is going to be this like really dynamic back and forth conversation. Sometimes interviews are very scripted. There's a piece of paper. Those are the only kinds of questions they can ask. No feedback can be given, and you have to respond with 4 examples, and you might give a few extra examples just to make sure everyone that was listening to that interview got those 4 examples, so that you complete the interview and are sort of successful. So some interviews are going to sort of feel cold and like very scripted, and that really just sort of depends on the style of the organization. Some may be way more casual. And then following up, it's a good idea to follow up within 24 hours, and sort of just say thanks for the interview. Really appreciated your time. And so it's good to check in, but well after that, if it's past the time that they said they would let you know. But generally within that 24-hour interview is not the opportunity to do that. But general thank you follow-up is an opportunity to kind of help establish connections and maintain relationships. Even if you don't get the job this time, showing that initiative can help in the future. So in summary, remember, every interview is a success. It's a learning experience. Use it as an opportunity to grow, evaluate that employer, see if you want to work there, try to represent yourself. It's all great practice. Try to do things to control your presence, and preparing is one of the most important things that you can do. And remember that it's an interview for you as much as it is your employer, in deciding, what you want to do with your future and gain this experience. And take the opportunity after to reflect. Think about how you can improve next time, and improve your questions, and try not to dwell on the silly little things that you did in those interviews. We all make mistakes, and just having this mindset of growth and improvement is really important. And then finally, kind of here's your little interview checklist. The time, location, and plenty of time to get there 5 minutes early. You've planned what you're going to wear to the interview. You've researched the organization. You've practiced common asked questions, formulated questions that you plan to ask during the interview. And you can bring extra resumes, a portfolio, writing samples, whatever is appropriate for the type of job that you're applying. That can kind of just show that you're taking some extra initiative and are prepared.